haunts of Camp Evergreen. The rusting gate groaned as Sarah pushed it open, the sound echoing through the overgrown clearing. Camp Evergreen, once a haven of childhood summers, lay before them, a spectral silhouette against the twilight sky. Vines snaked across rickety cabins, their windows like vacant eyes staring back. A chilling wind whispered through the skeletal remains of a once proud flagpole, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and forgotten memories. Sarah, Ben, Emily, and Max, all in their early 20s, had been inseparable since their days at Camp Evergreen. Now, years later, they'd come on a nostalgic weekend trip, a desperate bid to recapture a carefree time long gone. Each carried their own baggage, silent shadows cast by past mistakes. Sarah, the once outgoing leader, had a weary edge to her eyes. Ben, the jokester, seemed to force his laughter. Emily, the quiet observer, hugged her knees tightly, a tremor in her hands. And Max, ever the adventurer, masked a nervous energy with a restless gait. The cabins were worse inside. Dust motes danced in the dying light filtering through boarded windows. Cobwebs draped furniture like ghostly shrouds. A sense of unease settled like a shroud around them as they unpacked their meager supplies. "Remember capture the flag?" Ben said, trying to lighten the mood, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Yeah," Sarah forced a smile. "And the epic snowball fights in winter camp?" Memories, once joyful, now felt laced with a strange sense of foreboding. As darkness descended, they gathered around a sputtering fire in the central pavilion, the crackling flames casting grotesque shadows on the peeling paint. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Max scoffed, "Come on, it's just your imagination." But even he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into them from the surrounding woods. A loud snap, like a twig breaking, sent shivers down their spines. Ben pointed a shaky flashlight beam towards the source of the sound. Nothing. Yet the feeling of unseen eyes remained. They spent the night huddled around the fire, sleep a fleeting visitor plagued by nightmares of stalking shadows. Morning arrived, tinged with a chilling mist that clung to the trees like a shroud. As they started their hike to the old swimming lake, they discovered a single, blood-stained arrow protruding from the decaying sign that marked the trail. Fear tightened its grip around their hearts. Sarah, ever the leader, tried to maintain a facade of composure, but her voice betrayed a growing fear. The hike turned into a desperate scramble. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent them scrambling for cover. They reached the lake, an empty shell of its former glory, its water stagnant and opaque. Another arrow, this one tipped with a dark, unrecognizable substance, lay embedded in the rotting wooden dock. Panic surged through them. Their idyllic getaway had become a twisted nightmare. Back at the camp, they found the remaining cabins ransacked, their meager supplies gone. A single word, scrawled in dripping red paint across the mess hall wall, sent ice through their veins. "Remember." Sarah, remembering something from their counselor days, led them to the old counselor's cabin, a small, isolated structure at the edge of the campgrounds. Inside, they found a dusty box filled with faded photographs and news clippings. It was all there, the story of the camp counselor who had gone missing years ago, accused of cruel pranks and suspected abuse by the children under his care. The news clippings spoke of a search that yielded nothing, then of a chilling discovery. The counselor's body found deep in the woods, brutally murdered with arrows tipped with a toxic concoction brewed from poisonous mushrooms. The killer was never found, the case left unsolved. As the pieces fell into place, the fear morphed into a different kind of terror. They were being stalked by a vengeful spirit, a twisted embodiment of their childhood fear and resentment towards the missing counselor. They understood now why they had been targeted. This wasn't just a random attack. It was a twisted game of revenge. Suddenly, a guttural scream tore through the clearing. Emily. They found her outside her cabin, lifeless, an arrow protruding from her chest, the strange poison turning her skin an unnatural shade of green. Grief and terror choked them, but there was no time for mourning. They had to get out of there alive. Sarah, using her knowledge of the camp layout, devised a plan. They would use the old canoe from the lake to reach the river at the far end of the campgrounds. It was a risky gamble, but their only chance. As they pushed the canoe into the stagnant water, a figure emerged from the trees. It was tall and skeletal, dressed in tattered remnants of what might have once been a counselor's uniform. Its face was obscured by a tangled mess of hair and a mask fashioned from a crudely stitched animal skull. The smell of decay wafted from it, a horrifying confirmation of the twisted spirit inhabiting the body. The figure let out a guttural roar, a sound that seemed to claw its way from the grave, and charged towards them. Adrenaline surged through their veins. Max, ever the athlete, grabbed a broken paddle and braced himself at the front of the canoe. Ben, his fear momentarily replaced by a surge of protectiveness, grabbed a rusty fire iron from their meager supplies. Sarah gripped the oar with white-knuckled desperation, pushing with all her might. The chase was a blur of terror. The figure, fueled by vengeance, was relentless, its inhuman speed barely hindered by the uneven terrain. Max blocked a swipe of the spirit's clawed hand with the broken paddle, the wood splintering in a shower of fragments. Ben, eyes wide with fear, lunged at the approaching figure, thrusting the fire iron into its shoulder. It let out a piercing shriek, a sound that seemed to curdle the air. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air, momentarily distracting them. But the spirit, though wounded, continued its pursuit. Panic rose in Sarah's throat as they reached the riverbank. The water was murky and slow-moving, barely a trickle compared to the frantic pace of their pursuer. Working together in a desperate ballet of fear and survival, they managed to heave the canoe into the water. Sarah shoved them off with a final, earth-moving push. The canoe bobbed precariously as they scrambled inside. Sarah, her muscles screaming in protest, took up the oars. The current, sluggish as it was their only ally. They paddled with all their might, the sound of their desperate breaths filling the silence that followed the spirit's frustrated roar. They didn't dare look back. Every rustle of leaves, every dip in the water, sent shivers down their spines. Time seemed to stretch into infinity, each stroke of thee or an eternity. Doubt gnawed at them. Would the current be enough? Would they outrun the relentless spirit? As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red, a sliver of hope emerged. In the distance, they saw signs of civilization, a faint plume of smoke rising from a farmhouse nestled amongst the trees. With renewed vigor, they paddled towards it, their hearts pounding with a desperate hope. Just as the last rays of sunlight faded, they reached the bank. Scrambling out of the canoe, they collapsed onto the damp earth, gasping for breath. They didn't dare celebrate their escape. Their eyes darted around frantically, searching for the vengeful spirit. A loud scream from behind shattered their fragile peace. They turned to see the figure emerge from the trees, its rage burning in its vacant eyes. But before it could launch its attack, a shotgun blast shattered the twilight. An elderly farmer, his face etched with a mixture of shock and anger, stood on the porch of his farmhouse. The smoking barrel of his gun pointed at the retreating figure of the spirit. The spirit let out a final, ear-splitting shriek before disappearing into the thick undergrowth. The farmer approached them cautiously, his eyes taking in their disheveled state. In a gruff voice, he asked, "What in tarnation happened out there?" Sarah, her voice hoarse, managed to stammer out a broken account of their ordeal. The farmer listened patiently, his face grim. When she finished, he shook his head sadly. "That camp," he muttered, "always held a darkness. Poor souls." He took them inside his farmhouse, offering them warmth, food, and a much-needed respite. As the fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls, Sarah, Ben, and Max recounted their past. The childhood pranks and petty resentments that seemed so insignificant now. Shame mingled with their grief for Emily, a reminder of the unintended consequences of their actions. The police arrived the next morning, alerted by the farmer. They searched the campgrounds but found no trace of the spirit or any physical evidence of their encounter. The story Sarah and her friends shared was dismissed as a drug-induced hallucination. But they knew better. The scars, both physical and mental, remained as a chilling reminder of their horrifying weekend getaway. They left Camp Evergreen a changed group. The carefree spirit of their youth was gone, replaced by a deep-seated understanding of the fragility of life and the weight of their past. Their encounter with the vengeful spirit served as a harsh lesson. Sometimes, the shadows of the past can return, twisted and monstrous, demanding a reckoning for forgotten sins. It was a story they would carry with them, a chilling reminder that in the bright light of day, they couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes still watched them. A chilling reminder that the horrors of Camp Evergreen might not be entirely over. Fractured memories. A descent into the labyrinth. Anna's eyes snapped open, a gasp escaping her lips. White walls, stark and sterile, surrounded her. Panic clawed at her throat. Where was she? Who was she? Faces flickered in her mind. A gentle man with warm eyes, a child with laughter like tinkling bells. But their names, their connection to her, remained a frustrating blur. A cold sweat trickled down her back. As she stumbled out of bed, the floor solidified beneath her bare feet. Down a sterile white corridor she walked, the fluorescent lights casting an inhuman glow. The sterile silence amplified the pounding of her heart. This sterile landscape stretched on endlessly, offering no answers, only deepening the chilling void in her memory. Then a flicker. A doorway materialized in the white wall, beckoning like a half-forgotten dream. Anna, her curiosity battling her fear, cautiously approached. A gust of cool air swept out, carrying a whisper of forgotten warmth. Hesitantly, she stepped through. The sterile white was replaced by a swirling kaleidoscope of colors. A playground materialized, the sounds of children's laughter echoing in her ears. A little girl, with pigtails the color of spun sunshine, chased a red ball across the grass. "Mommy!" the girl shrieked, her voice filled with childish joy. Anna's heart ached with a bittersweet pang, a memory, fragile and fleeting, of holding that small hand in hers. Yet the name remained just out of reach. Was this real or a cruel trick of her mind? The scene morphed, twisting into a scene of domestic bliss. At dinner table, a man with kind eyes smiled at her across a steaming plate of spaghetti. Laughter and warm conversation filled the air, but the faces remained nameless, their connection to her shrouded in a heavy fog. Desperate, Anna reached towards them, but her hand passed through the scene like smoke. The laughter dissipated, replaced by a chilling silence. Tears welled in her eyes as the scene dissolved, leaving her alone in a swirling vortex of colors. She found herself in a dark and dusty library. The air hung heavy with the smell of old paper. Glowing books lined the shelves, their titles obscured by swirling shadows. As she approached a book, the words shimmered into view. The Forgotten Past. With trembling hands, she opened the book. The pages were blank, yet a voice, raspy and ancient, echoed in her mind. "This is your story, Anna. Remember, or be lost forever." Panic seized her. This voice, this book, held the key to her identity. She had to remember, but as she flipped through the pages, a sense of dread gnawed at her. Nightmares bled onto the blank pages, one by one. A car crash, the screams of a child, a blinding flash of light. A hospital room, sterile and cold, the smell of disinfectant sharp in her nostrils. A doctor's voice, heavy with regret. "We did everything we could." But the voice was drowned out by a maddening scream. It was her own scream, echoing through the corridors of her mind. The horrific scene replayed, a loop of her worst nightmare. The joy of motherhood, the love of a husband, all ripped away in a heartbeat. Grief, raw and agonizing, engulfed her. But amidst the pain, a flicker of recognition. The faces in the sterile white room, her husband, her child, their names a desperate plea on her lips. "Mark, Sarah, please." The scene morphed again, this time to a sterile white room. A woman strapped to a bed, her eyes wide with terror. A doctor, his face obscured by darkness, spoke, his voice laced with a chilling indifference. The experimental therapy is working. We're erasing the trauma, building a new reality. A new horror dawned on Anna. This labyrinthine journey through her mind wasn't just a memory loss. It was a deliberate erasure, a desperate attempt to escape the pain of the car crash. But at what cost? The voice in the book returned, mockingly. Face it, Anna. Without the pain, there is no you. Stay lost, or embrace the darkness and remember. Tears streamed down her face. The choice was stark. Remain in this fabricated world, devoid of pain but also devoid of love, or confront the horrific memories and reclaim her true self. A single tear fell onto the blank page of the book, leaving a shimmering stain. In that moment, a flicker of resolve ignited within her. Taking a deep breath, she faced the next page. She would dive back into the abyss of her memories, no matter the pain, to reclaim her past, her identity, and perhaps a way. The memory unfolded like a gruesome flower. The mangled wreckage of the car, the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber thick in the air. A choked gasp escaped Anna's lips. This time, she wouldn't turn away. She forced herself closer, the scene solidifying around her. Her daughter, Sarah, lay limp in the back seat, a single red shoe abandoned on the floor. A primal scream tore from Anna's throat, a raw echo of the pain she'd so desperately suppressed. But amidst the wreckage, a flicker of hope. Mark, her husband, was still conscious. His arm was pinned beneath the twisted metal, but his eyes met hers, a silent plea for her strength. Anna, his voice rasped. Remember, love you, Sarah. His words were a lifeline, pulling her back from the abyss of grief. She had to remember, not just the pain, but the love that fueled her. With a surge of adrenaline, she started scanning the car, searching for anything that could help. The library around her flickered, transforming into a twisted version of the car crash scene. Grotesque figures materialized, laughing, their voices echoing Mark's last words in a mocking way. Was this the labyrinth's attempt to break her again? But Anna wouldn't be deterred. Drawing strength from the fading image of Mark and Sarah, she focused on the task at hand. She spotted a crowbar wedged beneath the dashboard. The figures lunged, their touch cold and clammy. But fueled by a desperate love, Anna fought back. With each swing of the crowbar, a memory resurfaced. A picnic in the park, Sarah's first wobbly steps, Mark's gentle smile. The library walls shimmered, the figures dissolving into wisps of smoke. Finally, she reached Mark, freeing his arm. Together, they stumbled towards Sarah, a silent prayer on their lips. But the scene dissolved again, replaced by a blinding white light. A sterile hospital room materialized. Machines hummed in the background, and a doctor, his face etched with concern, stood beside her bed. Anna, he said softly, you've been in a coma for a month. We almost lost you. Relief flooded her. She wasn't alone. Mark and Sarah, a cold dread gripped her heart. The doctor's somber expression confirmed her fears. Sarah, his voice faltered. She didn't make it. Tears welled up in Anna's eyes, but this time, they were mixed with a fierce determination. She wouldn't forget. She wouldn't let Sarah's memory fade. As days turned into weeks, Anna battled the lingering effects of the accident and the trauma of her lost daughter. The therapy sessions were grueling, forcing her to confront the horrific memories she'd tried so desperately to erase. But with each painful recollection, a piece of her past, the love, the joy, the grief, reassembled. She embraced the pain, for it was a reminder of the life she cherished. One day, during a session, she remembered the experimental therapy. The doctor confirmed her suspicions, a radical treatment designed to erase traumatic memories. Thankfully, it hadn't been completely successful. As she recovered, Anna discovered a hidden journal, filled with Mark's entries chronicling their struggles and his unwavering love for her and Sarah. Tears streamed down her face as she read, his words a balm to her wounded soul. Slowly, her life began to take shape again. She found comfort in helping others who had suffered loss, sharing her story and the importance of remembering, even in the face of pain. The labyrinth of her mind wasn't conquered, but she had emerged, battered but not broken. She carried the scars of her past, but also the unwavering love for her daughter and the strength of her own resilience. One night, as Anna drifted off to sleep, she dreamt of a playground. A familiar giggle echoed in the air. Turning a corner, she saw a young girl with pigtails the color of spun sunshine. "Mommy?" the girl called out, her voice filled with childish joy. Anna reached out, a tear rolling down her cheek. The dream dissolved, leaving her with a bittersweet ache in her heart. Was it a memory, a figment of her imagination, or a glimpse of a future reunion?